How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're done. What? Today we're. Oh, yeah, right. Today we're studying Daf Samachay, Daf 65 of Nesech Avodah Zarah. Friends, yo friends. Okay, so today is actually a pretty interesting daf because there's an interesting transition. There is an interesting transition on today's daf, and I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'll tell you what it is in about 30 seconds. So first, let's talk about what's happening on today's daf. What the heck was that? I have no clue. Oh, the sun. What is good? The sun is like coming in and out. That's weird. The first part of today's daf, I guess it's that time of the day or something. The first part of today's daf, Rava visits a fellow named Bar Shayshakh in Ovid Kechovim. It's a shtickle maise to start us off on today's daf. Then we discuss acceptable Avodah Zarah wages, meaning we're wrapping up today the first Mishnah of the final parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah, and that's the transition I was talking about. We're transitioning to the next Mishnah, which I'll get to in a few seconds. Wrapping up the first Mishnah of the last parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah. If you remember, at the end of the Mishnah, well, there were kind of two parts of the Mishnah, but basically we had said, while you're not allowed to receive wages for working directly with yayn nesech, but if you were hired to do non-yayn nesech things, and then yayn nesech became part of it, it's okay. We're going to flesh that out. In what scenarios is that okay? And after that in the Mishnah, it had talked about a donkey driver who rents out his donkey. So if it's for Avodah Zarah stuff, it's not okay. If it's for other things, it is okay. Even if the Ovikov puts his flask on the donkey, we're going to talk about that. And then with that, we finish up the Gemara on the first Mishnah of the last parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah, and we transition in to the second Mishnah of the last parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah. And this is, how should I say this? Exciting? Yeah, I'd say it's exciting, but I think it's a combination of exciting and significant. Exciting and significant, because we are transitioning into like real Isser V'Heter. Like even today, already on today's stuff, we're going to get into no saying tam. No saying tam l'shvach, no saying tam l'fgam. I don't know, I'm in the middle of some absolutely ginormous Tosfos right now on Daf Samach Zayin, Daf Samach Ches, tam ke'ikr. I don't even know why that comes up anymore. This is big. This is like big stuff. It's big stuff. So we're transitioning into big stuff on today's daf. So we're going to get to a new Mishnah which talks about yayn, nesech, and mixtures, and then kind of that really also gets into mixtures in general. Min b'mino, min b'she'enu mino. We discussed this already in Tosfos last week or so, something like that, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So, Chaver, we have some great stuff ahead of us for today's daf. There's actually even some Tosfos takeaways at the end of the daf. So, Chaver, again, I'd say we have a very exciting daf in front of us. So, come and join us as we learn daf Samachay of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Okay, we are going to begin on Daf Samachay Amid Aleph, about 8 or so lines into the Amid, of course, where we ended yesterday. Rava Amtile Kurbana Bar Shayshakh. Yo, you with me? What did we have? Yesterday we had Rav Yehuda. So here we have Rava brings a gift to Bar Shayshakh, B'yom Edom, and it was on. He had some kind of Avodah Zarah festival that day, and who is this? Rava? Rava brought him a gift. Omar, Rava said, Yodaino Bey, Delay Palach Lavadus Kochavim. I know that Bar Shayshakh doesn't worship Avodah Zarah, and I'm bringing him a gift. There's no concern about Avodah Zarah. Also, Rava goes to Bar Shayshakh, Ashkeche de Yosef at Savore bevarda, and he found Bar Shayshakh in a very interesting environment. He was covered up to his neck in roses, the kaimenzonis arumis kame, with naked harlots in front of him. This is how Rava found Bar Shayshakh. I wonder this Bar Shayshakh was. Who was this guy? Akoponim. So Omerle istchu ke'agavne lamadase, and Bar Shayshakh says to Rava, so do you have this kind of a thing in Olam Haba? Bar Shayshakh says to Rava, look at this situation. It's pretty givaldi, right, Rava? Do you even have this in Olam Haba? Omerle didon adifo tvei me'ai. Rava says, actually, what we have in Olam Haba is better than sitting up to your neck in roses with naked harlots around you. Bar Shayshakh is like, what? It gets better than this? Bar Shayshakh was skeptical. To which Rava responds, Atun iko alaychu einsa de malchusa. So Rava says to Bar Shayshakh, look, this might be all fine and good. The roses, the harlots, the nakedness. But at the end of the day, you are fearful of the king. You are up to the whims of the king, and you are fearful of the king. But us, in the world to come, we won't have to worry about such things like kings. To which Bar Shayshakh says, yeah, but I'm not scared of any kings. I'm Bar Shayshakh. I'm the guy who does the stuff that I'm doing now, and everything's as good as it could be. Where am I? Adiyasve. And while this dialogue was dialoguing, also Pristigo de Malka, as fate would have it, a certain representative, certain messenger from the king came and paid a unexpected visit to Bar Shayshakh. And Omerle, he says to Bar Shayshakh, Kum, get up, Shayshakh, dika boilach Malka. The king wants to see ya. Kinofik vazil, and as Bar Shayshakh was leaving, Omerle, he says to Rava, any eye that wants to see anything bad happen to you, tipaka should be popped out. I guess maybe that indicates that Bar Shayshakh was like a powerful person, right? I mean, Rava was going to visit Bar Shayshakh on this special day. I guess Bar Shayshakh was a powerful person. He says, Rava, if anybody has any negative plans for you, may his eyes pop out. Amalei Rava, Amen. And Rava says, Amen. And guess what happened? Bar Shayshakh must not have anticipated this. But Paka Eine de Bar Shayshakh, and Bar Shayshach's eyes popped out. Oops. I guess he didn't realize it was going to happen to him. Amr puppies. Okay, so, all right, that was that anecdote with Bar Shayshakh and Rava visiting him. Very interesting anecdote. Amr Papi says, what Rava should have responded to Bar Shayshakh when Bar Shayshakh asked him about, like, does it get better than this in the world to come? I should have answered from the following pasuk from Tilim, Pnus Malachim bi Krisecha Nitzva Shegal Limincha Bechesem Ophir. Okay. That the daughters of the kings be Krisecha. Basically, I think the point was that we're going to have a lot of honor in the world to come. What does Rashi say? That it's good, that there's going to be a lot of honor to the Yidden in the world to come. I guess that apparently would have been a good pasuk that Rava could have responded to Bar Shayshakh. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that that Rava should have responded with the pasuk Me'acha from here. that in the world to come, no eye has seen how great it's going to be to those who had awaited the Ribono Shel Olam. So, okay, in the world to come, life is going to be gewaldig. Of course, all of us at Babylon Talmud, we're going to get together and we're going to be learning the Ribono Shel Olam's Torah. Maybe we could set up our own little Beis HaMedrash there in the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe we'll order a korban shlomim. Maybe we could do it. That would be nice. Someone's going to do it. Someone's going to do it. There's going to be like, how sweet would that be? If every day in the Beis HaMikdash, in the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash, we had like a Babylon Talmud Chabura. We would learn the Daf, Babylon Talmud. Of course, if we had any kashas, we can always ask Abaye and Rava, Rashi. Apparently, did I say this? Apparently, Rashi is my Zaydid. Apparently, I went to a Shabbat. Did I say this already? I can't remember. I went to a Shabbat Suda the other week at my cousin's house, and he was telling me that we come from Rashi and the Maharal. That makes me really happy. That's awesome because Rashi is like my favorite. Rashi's like, Rashi, like he just he makes everything, he explains everything so simply and to the point. Does that also mean that like the Bali, I'm like related to the Bali Tosfos and stuff? And once you get to Rashi, there's a direct line from Rashi to David HaMelech. I think I even saw it on like Wikipedia or something. So I guess that means that there's a straight, that we had got a straight line going all the way to David HaMelech. That's awesome. David HaMelech wrote Tehillim, where the first pasuk came from. Why was I saying this? So in the Beis HaMikdash, we'll have a chabura there in the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash, and I bet there's gonna be a service there. It's probably gonna be an app. There's gonna be an app that you can order like a korban shlomim. Why not? I started learning Mishnayos Yomi. Did I tell you I started learning Mishnayos Yomi? So we're learning Zvachim now, which is actually a perfect time. It's like a 5.5 year cycle or something like that. I mamish started at Horius, which we're starting in like 2 weeks. Like it's like the perfect time for me to start. So funny. I feel like with these things, I happen to get on like at the perfect time. With Daf Yomi, I got on at like the perfect time. I was like, wow, it was like literally right before it started again. It was a perfect time to get on again. And Mishnayos Yomi this is like literally what we're up to at Daf Yomi when I jumped on. But anyways, why am I looking at this? So what requires smicha? Shlomim, you need to do a smicha. That might make things tricky. That might make things tricky. Anyways, but here's the concept. Maybe you could have a shliach, but we'll have to figure this out. Maybe we could make a shliach. The concept is, we should start developing it already. An app that when you're in the chutzner of the Beis HaMikdash, I'm learning Daf Yomi in the Chabura, you can order a korban shlomim. That's such a great idea. You can order a korban shlomim, and they'll shechta for you and everything. They'll bring it out to you. I bet they'll have kitchens there and everything. Like mamish, you can we'll just order a few korban shlomims and they'll bring it out to us. Oh, that's gonna be awesome. That's gonna be so good. All right, we got something to look forward to. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Okay, and now we're moving on to the next section of today's daf, wrapping up the first Mishnah of the last pair of Masechet Avodah Zarah, acceptable Avodah Zarah wages. Right. So as I mentioned in the introduction, that the Mishnah had also discussed ways in which it could be okay to accept wages for Avodah Zarah. Generally, if that was not sort of what was the focus of the work. But here we go. Scharu lasos imo milach acher. So if the Yid was hired to do different work, if the Yid was hired to do different work, and then the Ovid Kachom says, "Oh, can you pass me the barrel of yayn nesech?" So then the wages would be acceptable. Now we're gonna get into what this actually looks like. V'afagav deloi Omleli tuse erev. V'mini asoiches apoil v'li tuse erev omar lo have chavis shel yayn nesech mimakom schar muter. Time the omleli tuse erev in kuli alma kuliyoma lo oki doki. Okay, so remember, our Mishnah had said that if it, that if a yid is hired to work with yayn nesech, that his wages are forbidden. That's not okay, and the wages are forbidden. However, as we just said, if he's but if he's hired to do something else, let's say to work with kosher wine, so then the wages are permitted. And then Eve, right? No, what did the Mishnah say? I just want to read the Mishnah. So if he was hired to do a different job, let's say he was hired to work with kosher wine, so even though the employer said, can you pass me this particular barrel of yayn nesech, that would be okay. Now the Gemara is saying, why would that be okay? Because if it's part of the work, if it's part of his work, and he needs to do it as part of his work, it'd be, if he can't really refuse, if he refuses, he'll be fired, he won't get anything. So then, like, part of the work now is the yayn nesech, and part of what he's getting paid for is the fact that he also helped out with the yayn nesech. So what exactly, so when we say that if he's hired for other work, if the Abikram says, hey, can you pass me that yayn nesech, it's okay. Well, in what way is it okay? Because it's not just automatically okay. If it would be considered part of what he's being hired to do, it wouldn't be okay. So then how would it be okay? So the Gemara suggests, well, how it would be okay is if this interaction with the yayn nesech happened after hours. Le'ituse erev, at night. So let's say he was hired as a day worker to do some other job, let's say to move around kosher wine, or I imagine anything else. The reason why I want to keep it with the wine and stuff is we're going to see it's going to be relevant for Rava. So if we just say kosher wine, so then that's acceptable. So if he was hired to work with kosher wine for the day, let's say 8 hours, and the 8 hours are over, and then afterwards, before he's about to leave, and he's already worked, he's already either made his money or he's kind of done the work that he's now earned his money. After that, and after hours, L'ituse erev, at night, the Vikochavim says, hey, can you pass me this barrel of yayn nesech? It's okay. It's not going to ruin the wages that he already worked for and that he's done working for. So, back in the Gemara, if we would read our Mishnah, which just says that if he was hired to do other work, even though the Vikochavim says, can you pass me the barrel of yayn nesech, the wages would be okay. The Gemara says, really? Would the wages be okay? Even though this dialogue, that's not this interaction, even though this interaction did not happen after hours, even though this interaction happened during work hours, the wages would still be okay. Even though the Avikom did not ask him to pass the barrel of yayn nesech le'itus erev at night, in after hours, we have a contradiction to that. That in Avikucham who hires a yid, v'li'ituse erev omar loy haver chavis shel yayn nesech, and at night, after hours, the Avikuchavim says, can you pass me the yayn nesech? Can you pass me some yayn nesech scharo motor? Well, in that case, after hours, that's okay, and the yid can receive the wages that he earned. But that's only acceptable because this again, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not dialogue, not discussion, interaction. This interaction. It's not the word I'm thinking of. Okay, I don't know. This talkingness. Even though this discussion, this interaction, this interaction happened. So where are we? So welcome. So time to say that's because this interaction happened at after hours, at night. in, that's why it's okay, kuliyoma. But if it happened during the day, during the course of the work that he was hired to do, and therefore he's expected to pass this barrel of yayn nesech as part of the work that he's being hired to perform, lo, that would be usr. So Abaye says, you know what? Okay, well, when our Mishnah says that the wages are permitted, it's specifically when this interaction happened after hours. That's why it's permitted. If it happened during the standard working hours that he was hired to do, and he has to now pass this barrel of yayn nesech as part of the work that he's hired to do, osir. But if it's after hours, muter. Ravik, Omar says over like kasha, hada amrle haverli meya chaviz b'meya prutis. Hada amrle haverli chavis b'pruta. Says Rava, it's unimportant if it happens during hours, after hours. That's not the important thing. What's important is the nature of the agreement. If the nature of the agreement was, I'm hiring you, the Chacham says to the Yid, I'm hiring you to move 100 barrels. I need 100 barrels moved. Barrels that are not yayn nesech moved. And for moving 100 barrels, I'll pay you 100 prutas. So in that case, it's all kind of lumped together. I mean, okay, maybe, and I'll tell you the alternative now. The alternative is you get I have 100 barrels to move. I'll pay you 1 pruta for each barrel that you move. In that case, in the latter, where he says, I'll give you 1 pruta per barrel, then each barrel is a separate pruta. And this 1 barrel that was yayn nesech is its own kind of thing. Yeah, you could just either say, okay, don't pay me for this particular barrel, or he could take that pruta and throw it into the Dead Sea, whatever it is, right? If you're saying each barrel is a separate pruta, so then it's like 100 different separate interactions that is being paid for, separate activities that is being paid for, so this particular activity can just be canceled. But if he's being paid 100 prutas for the job, which is to move 100 barrels, but if he refuses to remove this particular barrel, he won't get any of his money that he needs to move all of the barrels in order to get his 100 prutas in one lump sum amount. And he can't refuse this particular barrel, and he can't isolate the wages because all the the wages are paid for the entire job, not for this particular barrel. So in that case, regardless if this happens at night or during the day, in that case, if he's paying for the entire job, if he's being paid for the entire job, which includes this particular barrel of yayn nesech, it's osur. So says Rava, it depends on the structure of the agreement. So let's read it inside. Rava Omer says, Rava le kasha, hada Omer le haverli mea chavias b'mea prutis, that if the agreement is that the Chacham says to the Yid, can you move for me 100 barrels? And in exchange for, and as payment for moving 100 barrels, I will pay you at the end 100 zuzis. So it's not 1 zuz per barrel, it's the job is 100 barrels. When you complete the job, I'll give you 100 zuzis. You don't complete the job, you get 0 zuzis. Not zuzis, prutas. Alternatively, the other option is if the agreement is for 1 pruta per barrel, in which case, for this particular barrel of yayn nesech, he's receiving 1 pruta, which he can either forego or take it and throw it into the Dead Sea. That would be permitted. V'atanya, and similarly, we learn in a brisa, hasoichres apoil, a Avichovim who hires a Yid as a worker. V'amarlo, the Avichovim says to the Yid, haver li meya chavias b'meya prutis, move for me 100 barrels for 100 prutas. V'nim says chavish yayn nesech b'nein, and it turned out that among the barrels was yayn nesech, and remember, he's being paid 100 prutas for the entire job. So v'chavish yayn nesech b'nein scharo aser, the the wages are forbidden since he was expected to move this yayn nesech as part of the job for which he received 100 zuzas at the end. However, chavis bepruta, if the arrangement was for 1 pruta per barrel, then imtes chavis shel yayn nesech beinein, and it turned out that there was a barrel of yayn nesech among the barrels, schar mutter, the wages are permitted, and that the pruta that he received for that particular barrel, he would have to either forego payment or take that pruta and throw it into the Dead Sea. So therefore, again, when it comes to receiving wages, when it turns out that yayn nesech was part of what you were expected to do, Abaye says it would only be okay if the yayn nesech arrangement happened separate to the wage arrangement. It happened after hours. According to Rava, it doesn't really matter when it happens. What matters is how the employment structure was arranged. If it was arranged that you receive 1 pruta per barrel, so that barrel you can basically just throw, the wages received for that one particular barrel, you could just throw into the Dead Sea or something, and that would be okay. So now at the end of the Mishnah had said, that if a Yid rents out his donkey for an ovikachom to transport on the donkey yayn nesech, the wages are also. But what did the Mishnah say? But but if the Yid rented out his donkey for the ovikachom to sit on it, even though while the ovikachovim was sitting on the donkey, he then put his flask on the donkey. So now the donkey was essentially being rented out to hold it for yayn nesech to be put on it. We say that it is mutter. So now it says the Gemara, what's the chiddush here? Right? What's the chiddush? In the first part of the Mishnah, we already said you can't receive wages for working with the yayn nesech. But if it was essentially done in a permitted kind of way, like that wasn't the main thing, it's okay. So what's the chiddush here? Like what new thing are we learning in the case of the donkey? Just seems like a variation of the ratio. So asulamali ainu ratio. This is the ratio. Seifa. It's trichale. What we need the seifa of the Mishnah for with the donkey is schar leishev aleo. We need it for the last part, which is that if the Yid rented out his donkey for the ovikachom to sit on it, even though the ovikachom put his flask on the donkey, schar mutter, the Yid can receive his wages. The member de legin lav dinu lo suve. So now, Fred the Gemara, why is that allowed? Okay, so the Yid rented out his donkey to ovikachom for the ovikachom to sit on it. Okay, that's fine. Nothing to do with that yayn nesech Avodah Zarah there. The ovikachom then, while he's sitting on it, puts his flask on the donkey. And we're saying no big deal. Why is it no big deal? Shouldn't the Yid have anticipated? This isn't a fluke. You should have anticipated, wait, if I'm going to rent out my donkey to ovikachom, he might be putting his flask on it. He should have somehow planned for that, or made some kind of caveat, no putting your flask on it. Like, the ovikachom came, sat on it, put his flask on it. Like, that should have been expected. Why is the Yid allowed to accept wages for essentially knowing that his donkey was going to be used for an ovikachom to put his yayn nesech flask on it? It was totally expected. Why is that okay? Right? What? Why is it accepted to receive the wages? What, is it considered unexpected that the ovikachom would put his flask on the donkey? For a minute we have a contradiction. This is from Bava Metzia. Who remembers Bava Metzia? We loved Bava Metzia. When I say we, I say me, but you agree, right? You agree, right? So if you, a Hummer is be'etzem like a cab, like a taxi, right? Like an old school taxi, I think, right? So be'etzem, you had a donkey driver. It sounds to me like a taxi. You have a taxi driver, and you hire him to drive you someplace. Now, back then, donkeys travel slower than cars and trains and planes and stuff. So while we'll hire a taxi for a few hours, maybe they'll hire a donkey driver for a few days. So one who hires a donkey driver, okay, somebody hires a donkey driver, so the renter, the client, so what's he allowed to bring with him on the journey? What's considered included? What's considered expected? What can the client bring along with him? So he could bring along his clothing. Okay. Interesting. Was it Tosfos? What did Tosfos? Tosfos wants to say that it's weird that it says clothing, because obviously he could bring his clothing with him. Tosfos wants to say, I think it's Rabbeinu Tam says ksaso is pillow. Anyways, okay, whatever it is, let's just say clothing. V'leginoso, and his flask. Umzanoso shall also derech, and his provisions for the entire journey. So let's say it'll be a 3-day journey. He's allowed to bring enough food for the entire 3-day journey. Okay? So he can bring his clothing, his flask, and his provisions for the entire journey. Mikan ve'elach, but if he brings any more than this, chamer, ma'akiv, olav, the donkey driver could say, hey, wait, that's too much stuff. You can't bring so much stuff. Chamer maniach aleh sorim v'tevin, and the donkey driver can place on the donkey barley, I imagine, as food for the donkey, v'tevin, and straw. Umzonosav shel osa yom, and just the food that he needs for the first leg of the journey, just for that day. Mikan ve'elach, any more than this, socher ma'akev olav, the client, the one renting the hiring the taxi, if the donkey driver brings more than what he's allowed to do in terms of the barley and the straw and the provisions for that day, if he brings any more stuff, the renter can say, hey, you're taking too much stuff. No, so what's the kasha? Who could tell me what the kasha is? What the Gemara's kasha is? The Gemara's kasha is that we see that bringing a flask with you onto a donkey is completely expected. Right? We learned in this brisa, a person who hires a donkey driver, he's allowed to bring his clothing, his flask, and provisions for the way. So we see that it's completely expected for a renter of a donkey to be bringing a flask with him. So why then, when a yid rents out his donkey to an Oved Kuchavim, and the Oved Kuchavim brings his flask, do we say it's okay? Why is that okay? It should have been completely expected. He should have taken that into account. Also, he shows up with a flask. It's not surprising. Didn't come out of nowhere. Omar Abai says, Abai, Nihid legin dino la osube mia, ilo mosav le miamina le nechile agro diliginoso. So Abai says, yeah, it's expected, sure, but the thing is, you're not paying the wages that you're receiving. You're not paying separately for the flask, right? Meaning the donkey driver is charging, $100, 100 zuzes to the a rider. What's a person who hires? I'm like struggling to get the right word. To the client. Client seems a little official. To the rider. The rider, I think, is fine. So you have the driver and the rider. So the thing is, it's kind of like it's like you buy a plane ticket or something like that. Bring a backpack, don't bring a backpack. The price is the same. You're not paying separately for the backpack alone. Some of these airlines these days, who knows what they charge for everything, but more the budget ones. But anyways, so therefore, says Abai, the thing is, he's not, the rider isn't paying separately for the flask. V'haraya, if he doesn't bring a flask, we're not going to say to the donkey driver, oh, he didn't bring a flask, you have to reduce the price now. You have to reduce the fee, the fare, whatever, because he didn't bring a flask. No, it's a flat fee. Included in the fee is the flask, but he's not being paid for the flask. If he doesn't bring the flask, the fee doesn't change. So therefore, he's not actually receiving any payment for the flask. So again, says Abaye, sure, it's entirely expected that he would bring a flask. However, Mia ilo mosiv lay, if the rider would not bring a flask, Mia mina lay, would we say to the donkey driver, Vichile agro de liginoso, okay, reduce from his fare the portion of the flask? No, there's no portion of the flask, and therefore he's not actually receiving any separate payment for the flask, and therefore that is why his wage is permitted. So that's very interesting. So that's why the Mishnah has this clause with the donkey driver, because it teaches that when we're talking about receiving wages for avodas kochavim, it literally needs to be that you're being paid for, in this case, that yayn nesech. But if that is basically just like thrown in, and you're not actually receiving specific payment for the yayn nesech, it could be okay. But I think now, going back to this brisa about the rider and the donkey driver, there were differences between what each party is allowed to take, right? We said that the rider could bring enough provisions for the whole trip, even if it's 3 days, whereas the donkey driver can only bring enough for that day. So now the Gemara wants to understand, if along the way there's going to be places to buy provisions, well then chamer nami la'akev, let the donkey driver say to the rider, wait, why are you bringing provisions for the entire trip? There's going to be plenty of places to stop along the way. And if there aren't places to buy provisions along the way, well then socher nami lo la'akev, well then the rider should not be allowed to say, hey, don't take more than enough for just one day. You can't say that to the driver. So what's going on here? How come there's a difference, an imbalance between the rider and the driver in terms of their provisions? We learned about this in Masechta Bava Metzia. Of course, everybody remembers every word of Bava Metzia is gold. Amr HaPopit says, HaPopit, Lo tzricha d'shchiach l'mitrach l'mezabin mu'abna la'abna chamadarki l'mitrach l'mezabin tzorich l'abdarki l'mitrach l'mezabin. Well, here's the thing. Yes, it is possible to get provisions along the way, but it requires a bit of effort, meaning, for example, let's say it's a 3-day journey. Their mom is driving the whole day. They get to some kind of kretschmer in the afternoon towards Shkia. They get there for mincha time. They get to the dav mincha. The rider, when he gets there, he wants to find the minyan for mincha, sit down, maybe and get a bottle mashke. Maybe he'll find a Daf Yomi share there or something like that. He had a long journey. I'm sure he was learning the whole time. It's not so easy to learn on the donkey. Anyways, ideally, the rider gets to the kretschmer and he can just have some downtime. Not that now he needs to start figuring out, okay, now I need to start buying provisions for tomorrow. So, yes, there are provisions along the way, but it's a shtickle effort. When the rider gets to the kretschmer, he doesn't want to start thinking about, okay, where's the market here? Where can I buy food? Things like that. Whereas the driver, this is just kind of part of the gig. He's a donkey driver. This is what he does. He drives all the time. He's sleeping in a different city every single night, and he gets the kretschmer. Like, this is just like this is his life. This is his work. He's accustomed to this. He gets to the kretschmer, he kind of sets things up and finds the shop and gets what he needs. So says Rav Papa, the reason why there is an imbalance here in terms of who's allowed to take what is because it's also just their perspectives are different. A rider, when he gets to where, so yes, it is possible to get stuff along the way, sure. But it's not the most convenient thing to have to figure out to buy your provisions along the way. So therefore, the rider who is not accustomed to such requirements and finding, it'll be much easier and more pleasant for him if he could just have all of his food for the whole trip. That's why he could bring his food for the whole trip. However, the donkey driver who's more accustomed to these kinds of situations and getting to a new place and buying what he needs, so he can only bring enough for that leg of the trip, and it's expected that he will buy what he needs for the next leg of the trip at the previous stop. So again, yes, you can buy whatever provisions you'll need moving forward at each stop, at each leg. However, the donkey driver, he's accustomed to the effort that it takes to buy provisions as he gets to different places, whereas socher, the rider, it's not part of his normal experience to go to different places and have to start figuring out provisions for the next leg of his journey. So he's allowed to just bring enough provisions for the entire journey. So now we get to this kind of small, but I will see how it goes. I feel like it could either just be like super smooth and quick, or it could, to me, it felt very technical. It's like this little anecdote, which to me felt very technical. So here we're gonna go. It's just a small little anecdote here. The father of Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika. Did you get that? The father of Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika. Who is Rav Acha's father? Rav Ika. The father of Rav Acha Brei de Rav Ika. Rav Ika. So it seems that, this is how it wasn't super clear to me. I think basically what happened was maybe, so first of all, Rashi says that he kind of but he ran. So the last Rashi before the Mishnah says, Rav Ika Reish Nahara Hava. Rav Ika actually kind of managed the port. He kind of ran the port. I think I remember a story of like, where was, like, so there was somewhere where like the Yidden were in charge of the ports someplace, and I don't know if it was in Europe or someplace in the Middle East or Africa or something, but like there was some place where like the Yidden kind of ran the ports, and the ports were closed on Shabbos because the Yidden kind of ran the ports. Then they came to Eretz Yisrael and they were surprised that the ports in Eretz Yisrael were open on Shabbos. Anyways, so Rav Ika managed the port wherever he lived. But at the same time, I could be wrong about this. It was hard for me to figure out for some reason. I don't know. But this is what I'm going to say. If anybody understands this better, please tell us. I think maybe like one of his other jobs, whatever it is, he had this job where I think basically there would be kosher wine. I don't get the impression that he owned the kosher wine. I think maybe he worked for somebody who owned kosher wine. And Rav Ika's job was that he would pour. So basically, there would be clients. There would be people who would buy this kosher wine, not necessarily Jewish people. So you would have these non-Jewish people who would buy the kosher wine, and what they would do is, so first of all, there's a few. Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's a small little anecdote, but there's a lot of like details to this small little anecdote. Part of which is, basically, what you would do is, if you were to buy a barrel of wine, right, and we've been saying recently that these barrels of wine were like these earthenware kind of jug things. So when you buy the barrel of the wine, you would also get the barrel. And I guess the barrel has some kind of value. I mean, it's a barrel. I don't know. It's worth something. So when you would buy a barrel of wine, you'd also get the barrel. Now, these of the Kochavim who were buying this wine, what they did was they actually gave their wine skins to Rav Ika, and Rav Ika would fill up the wine skins and give the wine skins back to the Avdei Kochavim, and as his wage, as his fee, as payment, they would the barrel that was paid for, they would give to him. He would keep that because he would fill up the wine skins, give them back the wine skins. And they had already purchased the barrel, because when you buy the wine, you're also buying the barrel of the wine. But he would empty the wine from the barrel into the different wineskins, and he would then keep the barrel, and that was his payment. Now, part of the interesting thing is, so you have this kosher wine, and the kosher wine is in this barrel. So the kosher wine is kosher, and it's in the barrel. And you have Rav Ika, and he's pouring the wine maybe through a spout or something else, whatever. He's pouring the wine from the barrel, and the wine is still kosher, and he's pouring it into these flasks. But once it hits the bottom of the flask, these are flasks belonging to Avdei Kochavim. So the flasks are not kosher. It's yayn nesech. So once the wine gets into the flask, it becomes not kosher. And he's getting, obviously, the payment that he's receiving. He's receiving this barrel as payment. So this is kind of like what we're trying to piece together. As I said, it's like a small little anecdote, but like each line of this little anecdote requires so much context. Okay, so again, Avodah Zarah b'Ravika. So Ravika, so he would pour kosher wine into the flasks of the Ovdei Kochavim, to these clients. And then he would travel across the river to where these Ovdei Kochavim lived, and he would give them their wine skins filled with wine. And v'yavu gulfe be'agra, and they would pay him as his wage. He would receive not money in exchange for the yayn nesech, but the barrel that they had already bought before he poured any wine. Right, they had bought the wine they paid for already the wine with the barrel, and his wage was he got the barrel. He got the barrel. That was his wage. So he would empty out the wine into the skins, and the barrel was now his. Also, now the people came and they said to Abaye, and they said, I guess that they were a little bit concerned that Rav Ika was working a little bit too close to comfort with yayn nesech. Right? Because once the kosher wine got into their wineskins, it was yayn nesech, and then sounds like he's, at least for now, he's going across the river with these wineskins, and he's delivering it, and he's getting payment of the barrel. So they came to Abaye, they're like, what's going on with Rav Ika? So Abaye says to them, Ki katarach be'atera katarach. So Abaye says, look, I mean, if you look at what Rav Ika is actually doing, minus the transporting across the river, which we'll get to in a minute, but like, what's he actually doing, other than the transporting part? What's he actually doing? He's just taking wine, kosher wine, and pouring it into wineskins. That's all. So, but what's he doing? He's basically pouring kosher wine. Okay, so he's pouring kosher wine. What's the problem? Right, the actual work that he's doing is permissible. The work that he's doing is be'atera, is with kosher wine. It's with kosher. It's permitted. Katarach. Varotza b'kiyumo d'lo nitztru zike. Yeah, but what about rotza b'kiyumo? We had learned about rotza b'kiyumo. I don't remember. Was it yesterday? The day before? We had maybe 2 days ago. We had talked about. I don't know. I can't. I think it was yesterday. Yeah. What are we on today? Samachena? Yeah. So it was yesterday, I guess. Anyways, but what about rotza b'kiyumo? Right? Meaning once the wine gets into these wine skins, at that point it becomes yayn nesech because it's non-kosher, right? These of the Kochavim, it's their wine skins. So once the wine is in the wine skins, it's yayn nesech. And now he wants to make sure that the yayn nesech is preserved and isn't destroyed. He wants to make sure that it continues to be preserved until it gets to the Avdei Kochavim, so that, otherwise they're going to yell and scream that, hey, you sold us faulty merchandise if it breaks and everything. So he wrote to B'kiyumo, he wants it to exist until they receive it. So Demasni Ba'adayu. Well, no, it's talking about a scenario where he had already worked, the agreement was, if the skins break, not my responsibility. So he's not wrote to B'kiyumo because he really could care less if they break or not. Inami, alternatively, Demaisu Pristike Badayu. When they come to retrieve the wine skins, they come together with empty vessels so that just in case the wine skins break, they'll be able to put the wine, whatever wine spilled into these other empty vessels. So basically, Rav Ika worked it out so that Rotze B'Kima was not an issue, because regardless of what happens to the wine, between the time that he pours it into the skins and between them getting it, whatever happens during that time, he really doesn't care, because he's not responsible. But didn't we say that he's transporting them across the river? The Qatar Bisura, at that point, he is dealing with yayn nesech. Right? Abai, you said that, well, what's he doing? He's just pouring kosher wine. Yeah, but once it goes into the skins, it becomes yayn nesech, and he's then transporting that across the river. That must be an issue. Transporting yayn nesech? Well, he told so as Rashi points out, that Rav Ika was the manager of the port, and he had told the ferry people, the people whose job it was, I guess, to kind of ferry people across the river, that when you see these people, when you see them, they are my clients, give them the wineskins. So Kilu, he would keep himself out of the actually, once the wine was in the wineskins, he managed to remove himself from that point. He told the ferry people, like, if you see these people, those are my people, those are my clients, give them their wine, and he kind of removes himself from the equation. Inami de Nikite be Kitre, similarly, he says to the ferry people, here are these people, they have special ropes with special knots that you can identify them with. Again, if you see them, give them their wine. He removes himself from that part of the relationships, that he doesn't. There's basically all he's literally doing is pouring wine into wine skins. At that point, he is removed and he gets the barrel in exchange. Says Abai, in that scenario, he's really just working with permitted stuff, and that's why it's okay. Sheesh. So this was like literally a little story, but like every line, even every half a line, was like loaded with context. So anyways, at the end of the day, it seems that it was definitely a little bit risky, a little bit playing with fire, but Rav Ika managed to keep his portion of the bigger picture permitted. And now we get up to the next Mishnah, where we start talking about ta'aruvos, mixtures. It says the Mishnah, yayn nesech, when it comes to yayn nesech, shenofal al gabe anovim, that fell on top of grapes. I just bought grapes. What's today? Sunday. I bought grapes on Friday. I'm not usually a grape person. I'm more of a wine person. But I'm not usually a grape person. I saw grapes in the market, and I said, maybe I'll give it a shot. I tasted one. It tasted good. And, I'm not like such a grape person. But I'll tell you, the mangoes are real good. Real good. Yeah. The melons are still pretty good. The watermelon, I'm telling you, if you didn't come to Eretz Yisrael last week, or 2 weeks ago, when I told you to come, every day that goes by, the watermelons are getting further and further away from their peak. But they're still pretty good. Still better than the watermelon in America. I'll tell you that much. Still, there's no question. The watermelons, the avatiach in Eretz Yisrael, when they're like on their way down, are still better than in my experience, than the watermelon in America. Says the Mishnah, yayn nesech shenofal al gabe anovim. Okay, so yayn nesech falls on top of grapes. Yadichon vein mutaris. Well, easy fix. Wash them. If you have grapes. So now Tosfos points out that this is specifically when the grapes are still on the vine. The vine, stem, whatever, like when they're still kind of connected, you haven't plucked them off yet. So in that case, you can like literally just wash it off. The grapes have a peel. Once you pull it off of the vine, right? So then there's that hole at the top, and the yayn nesech can seek in, and then there's the next scenario in the Mishnah. But if they're still like on the vine or whatever, and some yayn nesech falls on it, it's just simply wash it off. Okay. Every mutaris, and that is permitted. But if they were split open, or as I just pointed out, if they were separated from the vine, and now there's kind of the hole where the ukitz was, where the stem was, well then asuris, they're forbidden. Now I don't think that they're like automatically asuris. I think that it gets into the cheshbon of no saint tam. If the nesech is going to be no saint tam, so then it would be also, well, assuming that it's considered min b'she'eno mino. If it's min b'mino, then it could be also b'masho, as we'll get into I don't think that we necessarily get into that today, but tomorrow we'll get into that. But anyways, once already there's a split in the grape, then you do have to be concerned about the nesech seeping into the grape. Fine. If the nesech fell on figs or on dates, if the wine is nosein ta'am, is right. So you have wine falling into dates or figs. It's min b'she'eno mino. Right. The general rule is min b'mino when it's the same, a mixture of same types. So then it's also b'mashu. Any amount is also. But min b'she'eno mino, such as this wine, right? Yayn nesech falling into figs or dates. That's two distinct types. So then it would be also b'nosein tam if it provides flavor. And if you're unsure, it is ruled based on shishin, if there's 1/60th or not. So if it imparts flavor, then it would be aser. Umaise bebaitus ben zunin. It was a maise with baitus ben zunin. Shevi grogris basvino, that he brought dried figs on a boat. V'nishtabra chovis shel yayn nesech, and a barrel of yayn nesech broke on the boat. Chaval, and it spilled. V'nafal gaben, and fell on the dried figs. V'shal chacham b'tirum, and he asked the chachamim, and they permitted the dried figs. Well, mamish, we're going to discuss that in 1 minute in the first part of the Gemara. Zeh klal, and this is the general rule. Kol shabahana behana also benosein tam. If it is nosein tam lishvach, right? If the iser, in this case the nesech, is positively impacting what it got mixed into, right? And if it's imparting positive flavor, hano oser. Kol she'ein bana also benosein tam. But if it is not beneficial, let's say, right, so for example, mutter, kigon chometz shenofa al gabe grisen. For example, if you have vinegar that falls on split beans, and the vinegar is going to make it taste bad. So if it's not, right, so again, so kol she'ein bana also benosein tam, if the iser is not positively imparting flavor, it's negatively imparting flavor, it's nosein tam lifgam, mutter. Nosein tam lifgam is permitted. So if you have an iser that falls into a mixture and positively enhances the flavor, that's nosein tam, and it's aser. But if it's negatively impacting the flavor, it's nosein tam lifgam, then it is mutter. And as we said, kigon chometz shenofa al gabe grisen, for example, if vinegar falls on split beans, that would be considered negative. Although I think tomorrow or the day after, we are going to discuss, I think tomorrow, the day afterwards, I think we are going to discuss, in what scenario would vinegar falling on split beans be considered nosein tam lifgam, a negative flavor? But assuming that it's a negative flavor, it's nosein tam lifgam, mutter. Says the Gemara, Maisa Lister, what's the deal with that story with, what was it, Zunin? Baitus ben Zunin, right? The Mishnah had said, Nafa al gabi teinim al gabi tamarim yesh b'em nosein tam also. I'm backed up to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said that if the yayn nesech had fallen on dates or on figs and is providing flavor, also. And then we have a Maisa story. But Maisa ben Zunin, She'evi Grogos Vesvini, was on a boat and there were figs. V'nishtabra chovis shel yayn nesech v'nafal al gabein, and a yayn nesech got on them. V'shal chacham asked the chacham b'yitim, and they said mutter. So, in fact, the Gemara Maisa Lister, what's to do with that story? And the one we said that if the yayn nesech falls on dates or on figs, if it's nosein tam, it's aser. And now we're bringing a whole story now that there were dried figs and yayn nesech got in. The chacham said mutter. I would imagine, I would assume the yayn nesech was probably positively impacted. It should be nosein tam. It should be aser. Maisa Lister, we bring a Maisa that contradicts what we had just said about nosein tam being aser. So chasuri merso v'ochikatoni, add the following. The Mishnah is missing a few words. Add the following: Im nosein tam lifgamu mutter. That, however, Right? So we had said that if yayn nesech falls onto figs or onto dates, if it's nosin tam lishvach, then it's osir. However, if nosin tam lifgamu, I'm reading that again, mutter. But if the flavor is negative, it's pogame, it negatively impacts what it falls into, then it's permitted. Umaise namin, there's episode maise, bebaitus ben zunin. She'oyo mevi grogris basvini, he was bringing dried figs. Now, dried figs are different than figs, right? We had said a minute ago, right before that in the Mishnah, that if yayn nesech falls on figs or on dates, if it's nosin tam, it's osir. But the story with baitus ben zunin was with dried figs, and apparently, if yayn nesech falls on dried figs, it will negatively impact the figs. So he was bringing grogus, he was bringing dried figs basfina on a boat, v'nishtabro chovish yayn nesech, and a barrel of yayn nesech broke, v'nofal gabein, and the yayn nesech fell on the dried figs and ruined them, basically. And the Chacham say, okay, it's mutter because it's nosin tam lifgam. So now the Gemara says this interesting ma'aseh that, I'll be honest, I don't really understand. I don't really understand it. Maybe as we're learning it now, something will come to me. Or maybe over the next week or so. We're almost done with Masechta Avodah Zarah. We only got another 10 days left of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Although it's beginning a little bit tricky. I'm telling you, the amount of Tosfos over the past 2 weeks is mind-blown. And it doesn't really let up too much for this in the Masechta. Insane, the quantity of Tosfos that I've been sifting through. Sheesh. Akoponim. Says the Gemara, Ahu kri dechite, there was a pile of wheat. Dinofal ole chvisa di yayn nesech. And a barrel of yayn nesech fell on the wheat. Sharye Rava lizabunilov de kucham. Now Rava permitted this wheat to be sold to an overcome. So what I don't understand is, like, if it's also yayn nesech spilled on it, I would imagine that it should be also bano. Why would it be permitted to sell the pile to of the chum? That's what I didn't really understand. I was trying to, like, Tosfos doesn't talk about it. I looked in the Rambam, it was unclear. I looked in the Meforshim on the Rambam, nobody really says much. There was a note in the art school which I think said that it's talking about stam yaynam, which is maybe why. I don't know. It's like a little. It's unclear to me, like, why he's allowed to just sell it to Ovakchom. I'm not. If anybody has any ideas, please share with us. But anyways, so again, there was this pile of wheat, and a barrel of yayn nesech fell onto this pile of wheat. Sharye, Rava l'zabunilov de kocham, and Rava permitted this pile to be sold to Ovdei Kocham. You can't eat it. It's also the yayn nesech fell on it, but you can sell it to Ovdei Kocham. Eis v'Rabba bar Levi leRava. Rabba bar Levi asks a kasha on Rava Beged she'avad by kilayim. If you have a garment, let's say you have a woolen garment, okay? And one thread of linen gets mixed into the woolen garment. And it gets lost, we don't know where it is. Basically the woolen garment is now shotness. You can't sell it to an ovek kuchavim. You can't either make it a saddle for a donkey. You can't make it a saddle for a donkey either, because we're concerned that maybe, like, what if your, like, pants rip and you need to make a patch? Maybe you'll make a patch from that garment. I will also tachrich in the meis mitzvah, but you can make the shadnez, right, with this garment into shrouds for a meis mitzvah. Right? If somebody dies, they need funeral shrouds. You can use this for a meis mitzvah. And how come we said that you're not allowed to sell this garment to an ovek kuchavim? Because what if the ovek kuchavim then sells the garment to a yid? So you can't sell the garment to an ovek kuchavim out of concern that he might then end up selling it to a yid. So why don't we say the same thing here as well? You have this wheat, yayn nesech fell into it, Rava says you could sell it to an overcome, but shouldn't we be concerned that the overcome is going to then, right, well, what if the overcome now sells it to a yid? Right, so Achinami also says, Zabun in Yisrael, don't we have to be concerned that the overcome is going to sell the wheat to a yid? So Rava says, that's a fair point. Hadar Shara Limitchinu. So then Rava said, you know what you could do? The overcome can grind up the wheat, Vilamapinu, and bake it into bread. Vilazbuninu lovdekucham shlobi bifnei Yisrael. So Rava says, you know what though? You know what can happen in this scenario? There's the wheat, the nesech fell on it. A yid can grind up the wheat, make it into bread, and then sell that bread to an ovikachavim. As long as yidden don't see that it was a yid who sold it to ovikachavim, and then once the bread belongs to ovikachavim, then it's pas akum, and the yidden will stay away from the bread. So you could do that. Now, if you didn't see this yid selling the bread to the ovikachavim, well, then it's a problem because then they'll think, oh, it's kosher bread. But as long as no yid see, you could sell the bread to ovikachavim, and then no yid is going to buy the bread from the ovikachavim, and in that case, it would be permitted. Now, for the Gemara, our Mishnah had said that if nesech falls on grapes, just wash off the grapes. So why don't you just wash off the wheat? Now, if they were split, then the grapes would be a problem. But if they're split, it's a problem. But if they're whole, then just wash them off. So why not just wash off the wheat? Whereas, so Papa answers, well, wheat is actually a little bit different because if you look at a wheat kernel, I guess, there's like a slit on it. Google it. Google wheat. You'll see each wheat berry kernel thingy has a slit. And via that slit, the wine would seep into it. And that's why you can't just wash it off. And Rava says, okay, grind it, make it into bread, and sell the bread, not in front of Yidden, and that way it would be okay. So that was Daf Avodah Zarah. But before we end, and if you're in a rush, you could skip this if you want, get back to it later. Looks like my do not disturb just turned it off. Let me turn it back on. Okay. Now, if you're in a rush, you can get back to this later. But there's two Tosfos, Gevaldige Tosfos, and that's why I have them here. This page was loaded with Tosfos. I chose these two because they're Gevaldige. First Tosfos the Ramaschil Habeged, asks a very interesting kasha. We had said that if you have my example, I was saying a woolen garment, and one thread of linen gets mixed into the garment, all of a sudden it's shatnez. Chevra, what about batel berov? That's an interesting shaila. Is that not an interesting shaila, Chevra? That's why I picked out this Tosfos. It's an interesting shaila. Why don't we say batel berov? What an interesting shaila. Like, on the one hand, it feels like a weird question to ask. On the other hand, it's such an interesting shaila. One thread of linen gets mixed into a whole woolen garment. Can we just say batel? Can we just say that one thread is batel? So Tosfos answers, basically, I imagine the answer that at least some of us were thinking in our hearts, in our guts, which is, well, that's kind of what shatnez is. It's like, yeah, you have a woolen garment and one thread of linen gets mixed in. That's what shatnez is. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's not batel berov. Like, that's shatnez. The whole thing with shatnez is a woolen garment is permitted, a linen garment is permitted, but once they come together, that's a problem, even if it's just one thing. Like, that's the whole thing of shatnez, right? So good question, but batel berov won't apply here. The Tosfos then asks a follow-up question, which is equally as interesting, in my opinion. Well, then what about basar b'chalav? Meat is permitted, milk is permitted, sezamin aser. They're forbidden together, and yet by basar b'chalav, we do say batel berov. Apparently, we'll get this in chulin more, but if a little bit of milk gets mixed in with meat, it could be batel berov. But shouldn't we say that that's the whole point? Is that separate, they're okay, but you bring them together, also it becomes aser, even any amount. So Tosfos says, well, there's actually something unique when it comes to basar b'chalav, which is derech bishul aser Torah. That basar b'chalav is aser in a way that you are in a way of cooking. And Tosfos doesn't elaborate, but I understand this to mean, and if anybody has other ideas, please share them, is that basically, derech bishul, part of cooking, imparting flavor, right? That basar b'chalav, derech bishul asur Torah, i.e., if the chalav gets into the meat, like a cheeseburger, okay, obviously the cheese is part of the thing. You taste the cheese; it's part of the dish, right? So basar b'chalav, kilu derech bishul asur Torah. If a tiny bit of milk falls in, you can't even taste it, adding no flavor. You didn't even want it there, etc. It could be batal birok. But if it's imparting flavor, then it would be asur. So that's a unique thing when it comes to basar b'chalav. That was Tosfos number 1. Also, the Tosfos takeaway for Tosfos Divrei Maskil at Beged is question number 1. Why not say batal birov by one thread of kilayim? Answer number 1 is because kilayim is by definition a mixture of any amount. Two things independently mutter, but together, but asur together in any amount. That's kind of the whole thing, that when they come together it becomes asur. Question number 2 is, why then would basar b'chalav be batal birov? We should say any amount is asur there. Part of basar b'chalav is derech bishul, so it would have to be derech bishul, and I understand that to mean like imparting actual flavor. Next Tosfos Divrei Maskil Avol, very, very another very interesting Tosfos. We had said that you can use shatnez for tachrikin, for burial shrouds. Tosfos asks very interesting questions. First of all, wouldn't burying in shatnez be mocking the dead? Wouldn't burying in shatnez be mocking the dead? I don't know if I wrote that question correctly, but basically Tosfos quotes a Gemara in Menachos, which actually says that we should bury people in tzitzis. We should bury people in tzitzis, because if you don't bury people in tzitzis, well then all of a sudden everyone at the funeral is like wearing tzitzis and this person isn't. It's like mocking the dead, right? This person doesn't have tzitzis. But we said that that's really just, so Tosfos says that's really just a concern, however, by tzitzis, because tzitzis is connected, called the mitzvah, called Torah, all the mitzvahs, right? Tzitzis b'gematria is 600, and then the 8 strings and the 5 knots is 613. So tzitzis will say, okay, there could be mocking the dead when it comes to tzitzis, and therefore I think if I remember correctly, that the Gemara in Menachos therefore says that we would want to bury Rabbi Ozah sheet berush yatilu bo tzitzis, right? Right, they should have tzitzis, so that it would, because without tzitzis, which is school called to connect call a mitzvah, so it would be mocking the dead if he doesn't have tzitzis. We don't. I think Tosfos then goes on to say that we don't do that these days. However, in terms of shatnez, would it be mocking the dead to bury a person wearing shatnez? So we say that no, the concern of mocking the dead is only when it comes to tzitzis, not by shatnez. That wouldn't be concerned. But then Tosfos asks another kasha, but won't they be resurrected wearing shatnez? What about tchias hamesim? They're going to come to life, they're going to be wearing shatnez. Now that's a downer, right? Tchias hamesim, people come together, they're wearing shatnez. Now what do they do? So listen to this. This is an answer that I'm sure has many layers, and I don't fully understand it, but it's an extremely interesting answer, that we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that there will be no mitzvahs in the world to come. Now I feel like that is a whole sugya in itself. What does that even mean? But anyways, let's just keep it like, at the tip of the needle, over the tip of the iceberg, that we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, there will be no mitzvahs in the world to come, and therefore, coming b'tchias hamesim and shatnez doesn't actually matter. Shatnez won't be an issue. Okay, I'm sure that there's that goes very deep. But that's a very interesting answer. So the Tosfos takeaway is question number 1: wouldn't burying in shatnez be mocking the dead, right? So we say, meaning because we said by tzitzis that if he doesn't have tzitzis, it would be mocking the dead. So right, because tzitzis, right? Everyone has tzitzis. He doesn't have tzitzis. So also here, burying a mace in shatnez, wouldn't that be mocking the dead to bury a mace wearing shatnez? We don't wear shatnez, so that's only a concern. But tzitzis by shatnez, bury him in shatnez, that's fine. It's not an issue of mocking the dead. Question, but then what about tchias hamesim? But wearing shatnez, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan that there will be no mitzvahs in the world to come, and therefore shatnez won't actually be a concern at tchias hamesim. Chevre, that was Daf Samachay of Masechet Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed this gorgeous daf. Today's daf began with Rava's visit to Bar Shayshakh. which was very interesting. He was covered up to his neck in roses, and there were harlots, and he got taken away, and his eyes popped out. Very interesting anecdote there. We then moved on to acceptable Avodah Zarah wages, right? Because the Mishnah had said that if a Yid gets hired to do other stuff and then gets paid and then is asked to move a barrel of Avodah Zarah, it's acceptable. So we talk about in what context is it truly acceptable. Abai says only after hours. Only if the request to move the yayn nesech was after hours, after he had already done the work that he was meant to do and that he was being paid for, only then would moving the barrel not impact his ability to collect his wages, the barrel of yayn nesech. Rava says, that's not important. After hours, during hours, what's important is the agreement structure. If he's being paid for all the labor, whatever labor he does, and he gets paid in one lump sum, and if he doesn't do any part of the labor, he doesn't receive any of it, well then the yayn nesech is part of the labor that he's being hired to do, in which case, it's part of the labor that he's being hired to do, in which case it would be also. But if he's being paid for each individual barrel that he moves, and he's therefore just receiving independently a pruta for this particular barrel, well then you can either say I don't need he could forego the pruta for that barrel, or take that pruta and throw it to the Amamelech. That could be okay. We then also talked about an interesting scenario where a donkey driver can allow a rider to come onto his donkey even with his wine flask, since that wine flask is not an item that the rider is being charged for specifically, and therefore that is okay. And then we moved on to the next Mishnah, which segues into this sugya that we will be consumed with for the next several daf, maybe even towards the end of the Masechta, though I'm not at the end of the Masechta yet. When there's yayn nesech in a mixture, we get into mixtures. We said that if it's nosein tam l'shvach, it is forbidden. So also if it's beneficial. However, if it's nosein tam l'fgam, then it is detrimental. That's sort of the klal that we started working with today. Chevra, that was Daf Samach Hey of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.